Well, hello and welcome to Reimagining Education, a podcast from Michigan International Prep School. It's been a while. We took a break here for Christmas break and the New Year's, and now we are into January. We are in a new office building with people, with offices. It's wonderful. I'm excited for most of you to come see it someday and enjoy it. But also something that we didn't have the last time we did a podcast episode was Mr. Roy Sovis over here. So I'm your host, Eric Van Houten, if you did not watch in 2021. And joining me is Roy Sovis, the Director of Curriculum and Instruction, I think I got that right, at Michigan International Prep School. So glad I could steal you for a little bit. Roy, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Perfect. So like I alluded to, Roy joined the MIPS team a few months ago, right? Like
very end of October.
Very end of October, right? So a little bit more than a few, but for 4 months-ish, Roy joined us. And apart from all of the staff loving Roy, which is confirmed, he has been hard at work from day one. Filling some big shoes and taking on a lot of responsibility. So you're here because I would love our listeners, our families, and even a lot of our staff that listen to this podcast to get to know you, to know who you are, to see you, to hear your voice, and then also to hear what you're excited about, hear what your vision might be here at MIPS. So we'll start with that. Roy, what should we know about you, and how did you end up here?
Wow. Well, it's, I could go on for hours, but don't want to do that, right? Nobody wants to hear hours of stuff.
I wouldn't mind, but
yeah, there's some who put a limit on it, right? Well, it's interesting because I lived in Genesee County my entire life, grew up here, went to one of the public schools here. And my experience in education started very early. I was a junior in high school, and I was just like, I got to be a teacher. And part of that was I was a goof off. I didn't take school seriously. And I just felt like I could really contribute and do a better job. I think I can do this. So went to U of M Flint and became an educator, and was blessed to get hired at one of the local schools and started teaching and loved it. And I thought, I'll work my way up through the ranks, right? I'll work my way up there. I'll become a superintendent. And so I started that process, and so worked in the classroom for a while, and I had an opportunity after 3 years. I was taken into a position to be the K-8 social studies chairperson. And that happened because the state was just approved social studies standards. And then we had a state test coming. So we had to train staff on, now being standards driven, unpack them, develop assessments, get ready for the state, assessment that was coming down the road. And it was the first time in social studies. So I began, really training adult learners at that time. And I really liked it. I liked helping other teachers really grow in their craft. But yet at the same time feeling uneasy because I'm like, I'm still new at this. I don't even know if I know what I'm doing, right? But we needed that to be done, and I got hired to do it. So I was kind of tossed in, you kind of make it work, right? So I did that for 3 years, and then a position at an intermediate school district locally came about, and I applied for that position and got it. And I was
as
really,
you do.
I was torn about really applying and taking it because I really loved being in the classroom. I was a middle school teacher. I loved middle school kids. I loved their quirkiness, and I just loved it. It was great. I was having a good time. I loved going to work every day and being with the kids, and so the position came along, and so I took the position. My thinking was, wow, and it was at year 7. So I was in a groove. I felt like I had some things happening well. I was getting good feedback from parents, still had an opportunity to learn. I just finished my first master's degree, which was in instructional design and educational technology.
First implies that you have more than one.
Yeah, I do have a second one. My first one, yeah. And that really opened my eyes. I got really excited after completing that one out of Michigan State University and really enjoyed that learning. And so that was part of it, is moving forward, because the position at the intermediate school district was about someone who had a curriculum background and knew instruction. And so got into that position, and I was there for 22 years. And I was there that long because I love the work. And the whole idea was that I could interact with a lot of other teachers and a lot of other administrators. And my thinking was, if I can pour into them and they pour into other students, then I'm impacting more students in a positive way.
Yeah.
So where if I'm in a classroom, I'm still impacting a lot of kids and influencing them and working with families, which I really enjoyed. But that was the thinking. Well, I went, let's go ahead and do this. So along that particular position really prepared me for this position. And it happened over the course of those years. There were times I thought about trying some other things. In fact, at one point they were talking about some budget cuts and I've sat in hundreds of hours of meetings with administrators, elementary, middle school, high school, curriculum directors, superintendents. And, I thought, well, maybe go into administration. So when they were talking about budget cuts at one point, I went back and got a second master's degree. And when I was thinking about that, I had young children and I was thinking, I got to make this work. I loved going to MSU and traveling and doing that. But I thought, man, well, let's try a different route. So I got one in administration and supervision through the University of Phoenix. And the reason I did that is when I did my research, they were the ones who had been doing online teaching for a number of years. And so I went, all right, we're going to do this. So in the late 90s, earned a master's online and it was all virtual. And we didn't meet in person at all. Everything was virtual. Everything was email. So it was very, very basic compared to what we're capable of doing today.
I was going to say, a lot of people might be like, oh, yeah, I know. I mean, my community college just does that, right? But this was the 90s.
Yeah.
The internet was barely a thing at that point compared to now, at least. So
yeah, it was it was much different, but a great experience. I'd do it again. And it was one of those things, hey, I can get this in 18 months. I'll be fine. It was brutal because it seemed as if the expectations were more because you had to really, the input was with an instructor at times, but more of it was self-inputted. You had to be self-directed. You're taking in a lot of that content through a lot of reading. But the neat thing is they had discussion boards built in, and you had to go in and respond to questions and that kind of things. And it was people all over the world. And so one of the capstone projects there were 5 of us that had to do a project. And in that particular project, worked with somebody in Korea, the UK, and then somebody in California, a couple people else in the Midwest. And so as we communicated online in those late 90s, it was like, well, we had to really choreograph that because we were working on different sections of this report we had to put out. And yet we had to have some conversation and work on that, but consider the time frame. So I was thrown into, virtual learning and online learning at that point. And really, really enjoyed it. And so that was there. But I also at the ISD, I was a state coordinator for the National Student Parent Mock Election. And so I took that job. And for 6 years, we ran elections. And we first did it paper, pencil. But by 2006, we were the first state in the country to do online voting. And so we actually had an online voting system, and we were blessed to be recognized by the National Student Parent Mock Election and CNN. We won a CNN a technology award for doing that at the time. And so then the ISD kind of moved in a different direction, and the National Student Parent Mock Election found someone else in the state to run that. We were moving in a different direction. So during that was another experience. It was like this whole online thing and doing things technology-wise was just something that I was blessed to have that opportunity to be a part of it. Yeah. And so that continued throughout my career at Genesee ISD. I think another thing about it that helped prep me for this is working with not only leading teachers and having I called them social studies teacher leader meetings and groups, because I considered every teacher a leader. You didn't have to have the title. And some of these teachers were department chairs and actually received a stipend for the work. And others might be a lone ranger. They might be the only high school teacher because of a small school. But it was about connecting them and sharing resources and utilizing the internet and eventually teaching people how to use, Google Drive to store documents and even using OneDrive and other tools so that we could collaborate, that you don't have to be by yourself in that school. But also, as we collaborate with one another, we can lead with one another. We all have, talents and we have strengths and weaknesses, and let's capitalize on those strengths with one another and support one another. So I led those groups, and that kind of got me into growing with teaching adult learners. And then I worked with a lot of districts where they'd call me in and do curriculum development, do professional development. Got involved also with the FAME project, the Formative Assessment for Michigan Educators. And in the state of Michigan, they have invested quite a bit of money. And this is a third round of funding for 5 years. So they're working towards 15 years. Because of all of the research and what formative assessment is, the state realized this and said, this is critical. We need to get this in classrooms across the country. So Kim Young from Michigan Department of Education has headed that up, got to work with her. We held institutes at the ISD we did it for about 12 years. We'd bring teachers in, running through an institute, help them improve their understanding of assessment. How do we gather evidence from kids and their learning and use that to gauge what their next steps are, but be intentional about it? And you think, well, that's what teachers do every day. Yes, but we're leveling it up. We're upgrading their skill sets so they can be more intentional about using that data to customize learning. And there's a lot to it. It takes about 3 years to wrap your head around it, but there's another piece to that experience that I bring to this job to help the staff realize what MIPS is all about. And that is meeting the needs of the families and the learners and customizing it and truly customizing it, not having a cookie cutter approach to education. That there's some ebb and flow, there's some adjustment because not every kid is the same. And so they need different types of services to get them through their educational experience. Yeah. Along the way, I guess another part of me is not only working with administrators in helping them plan professional development and providing advice specifically initially at social studies, but then growing into this whole assessment piece. Because not only was formative assessment, but in all subject areas, I had the opportunity to do some training for summative assessment development. So those end of semester, end of course tests, and training teachers to say, okay, there's an instrument, you're gathering that data. What's the quality of that instrument? How do you know that tells you anything about student learning at the end of learning? So what goes into that? How do we design those? A lot of times teachers, they're left to themselves, designing those assessments. And a lot of undergraduate programs don't train. Some do now. They're better at it now. But back then, there just wasn't the training on how to create a summative assessment and how to utilize that. So got to work in all the subject areas and training teachers in doing that. So that's been brought with me to this position. In addition to that, spent probably about 5 to 7 years moving districts in the direction of effective grading practices. And this is still a hot topic in education is, a kid takes a course and they get a grade, A, B, C, D. Well, what does that tell you? Yeah. So I got an A. Well, what does that mean? Well, I got an A. Well, when you look at what goes into those letters, that makes that an A, 100% scale, which is very subjective. Most of us have experienced that, but the 100% scale, very subjective.
You'd assume teachers love that, and that's why it's there, but I have not found that to be the case.
The 100% scale? Yeah. It's tough because what happens is the individual teacher, and usually we find this at the secondary level, 6-12, it's up to them what goes into that grade. So what's the percentage of my test? Do I add homework? Do I give extra credit for a Kleenex box they brought in? What goes into it? Well, by the time you're done and you got participation in there, you look at it and it's a conglomeration of like, what does that tell me about learning? What does the student know and be able to do? Well, how much was that? It was influenced by the Kleenex box he bought in for extra credit or she, right? So we worked with a number of educators and had, we did a number of webinars and in-person trainings to really help people wrap their head around this idea of, performance-based type of grading. And it's called, some will call it standards-based grading. Some called it standard reference grading. And it's caused a lot of turmoil across the country because of the way people approach taking it, because it was such a huge change. And we have a long ways to go with that. But the bottom line is, those experiences really opened my eyes on how do we provide some type of mark, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, whatever the symbol is, that has meaning for the parent and the student, that is an indicator of how well they've met the criteria that says, you know what you were expected to know and be able to do as a result of this class, you're spot on. You're right where you need to be. And that's the way it is in the real world. Because when we go outside, I shouldn't say real world. I want to rephrase that. That's the way it is in the world outside of the classroom. So I would argue that effective grading practices is really trying to bring in what students are going to experience outside of the classroom. So for example, if I want to become a lawyer, I have to have certain credentials. And in order to earn those credentials, I have to demonstrate competency in certain areas. So there's some criteria to match, right? And a lot of times the bar exams, right? A big one. Look at the, say the vocational trades, say someone who goes into welding. You know, they go, oh, that's vocational. Well, you know how much knowledge you need to know about metals and electricity?
Yeah.
Right? So
that's crazy you brought that up because, you know, we encourage trades. We encourage and prepare for college, all of that. 3 of my students want to go to trade school for welding. That's so specific. I can't even say that word. That's so specific. But that's crazy. Anyways, you said welding, but
but see, that makes the point is that there's certain criteria you got to meet to then go out and people can have confidence to say this person is a welder and they know and are able to do this because they've met the standards. Yeah. They've met the criteria. They've demonstrated. Is that taking a paper and pencil test? Is there some of that? Yes, but not always. Yeah. You have to demonstrate the skill set. So you can look across and say that, you know, you look at any profession, there's performance level standards. There's criteria that you have to meet. It's not getting an A, B, C, D or taking a paper and pencil test. Yeah. So bringing that to this is really helping teachers look at it. And really, if we can get them to move in the direction about preponderance of evidence. So anything I have a student do, why am I having them do it? We need to get rid of busy work. So if I have an assignment and I give it to a student, what's the purpose of that assignment? Now, it could be for practice. I'm going to kind of grapple with that, and I've been taught something, so I want to take a look at it, and I got to practice a skill. But it may be something I give them to see where they are in their learning, and if they nail it and they demonstrate it, should they move on? Maybe so. Yeah. Why give them more work in an area where they've demonstrated a competency or an understanding type thing, correct? So the effective grading practice really was something involved at the ISD that I bring to the table here.
You're like connecting all the dots. You even use preponderance of evidence. I remember using that in pre-law. And I'm at an online school as well, similar to the University of Phoenix, that is competency-based. Right. So I get to see some of this in practice and I'm hearing what you're saying and I'm like, I love that. And this is master's level, right? But are you saying that this could possibly be where we should be heading in elementary, you know, in primary and secondary school? Yeah.
Currently at MIPS, you know, we have that 1, 2, 3, 4 scale. Okay. So part of that is helping parents and young people understand that 1, 2, 3, 4 doesn't relate to an A, B, C, D. Yeah. Right. So if we say you have earned a 3, that means you've met what is expected. You've demonstrated, you understand the content, you've demonstrated the skills. You're right where you should be. Yeah. Okay. If you're 4, you're beyond that. You're beyond the level where you should be, which is good. Is that advanced? No, not necessarily. It's just above and beyond where we pace kids, generally speaking. You're going to have some a little bit ahead, some a little behind. It means if a student gets a 2, doesn't necessarily mean they're detrimental or not detrimental. It doesn't mean that like they're behind. It just means they haven't demonstrated competency at a level that they really should be. That tells us they're going to have a higher chance of being successful in the next grade or the next thing they attempt to do or learn. Doesn't mean they won't be, because we all overcome deficiencies. Did you ace every class? I didn't ace every class, right? But yet we turned out to be successful, and some of those gaps were filled in along the way.
I'm always surprised how many people that work at a school who did not do well in school growing up. Yeah. It's noticeable.
Yeah. So we're that's the kind of what's in place at MIPS right now at the elementary, but it's also helping, you know, one of my goals is to really help teachers look at the preponderance of evidence in the student learning. So let's say a student doesn't do well on the assessment, but does well on the activities. Well, you still have to pause to say, well, are those activities worthwhile? those things that we're doing? What evidence does it give us? Is it aligned to the standards? Is it busy work? What's the quality of those? Because if they're good quality and the student does well on those, but doesn't do well on the assessment, might be a little bit of a red flag. Maybe not, but let's take a look at the evidence. So maybe we want to gather evidence in a different way about that particular competency, because if they're able to demonstrate it in a certain way, but not another way, what does that tell us? Well, sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. But should a student be penalized for that? You see, so if we can move them in the direction, I'll give you another example. What about a student, for example, that really has a gift for mathematics? Okay. And they're doing really well in their classes, but they can really ace the test and they don't need to do the repetitive. I don't need to do this practice item 10, 15 times. Yeah. I've got it. I can take your test. I could take a pre-test. I could test out of this class. In fact, State of Michigan has that now. There's a way students can test out. But think about that. Should a student be penalized for not doing the classwork or coursework if they don't need to, if they still take the assessment and score very high on it? If that's your instrument that indicates whether or not a student knows and is able to do something, and a student scores well without doing the busy work, well, let me rephrase that, without doing work that was practice that some students need, but not all.
Yeah. Because it's not busy work. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. You see, so that's what you have to look at, is what kind of evidence do we have of student learning? Because if I have evidence of it as an educator, that they're meeting the standards and demonstrating competency, why does it have to be a paper and pencil test or that exact instrument? Yeah. You see, it's really about the learning and focusing in on what we want students to learn and be able to do, and what evidence do we have of that. So that when you can get educators to understand that, then when you look at your assignments, you can sit back and go, why do I give this assignment? What's the purpose? What does this tell me about the student and what they know and are able to do? Otherwise, what are you doing it for? You're wasting time, right?
I love that.
Yeah. So that's I think that's where in MIPS we want to move in that direction. I have to do an assessment. I'm still new here. I'm just like been drinking out of a fire hose, right? It's like which has been great. But I've got to have
new blood. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I got to find out where the staff is, and that's part of what I'm doing now with my meet and greets and meeting with staff and finding out where they are in some of these issues.
Yeah. So I don't want to keep you here forever. We're getting close to the time, but the big takeaways that I get immediately from that is A, you probably have a cabinet somewhere filled with awards and diplomas, and B, you are definitely one of the most qualified and influential educators that we could have here. And that's saying a lot. And you're at a virtual school. So if you could distill, and I'm putting you on the spot here, but if you could distill a overarching vision or a goal that you have now that you are in a new position, a new school, a new type of education than you were previously, what is that vision or goal, or what should educators be focused on in general that you're hoping to foster here? That's a huge question, so you can answer any aspect of that you'd like, but really getting at, what's exciting you and what gets you excited to sit at your desk and start making those calls.
Well, I think the first thing is that I'm excited about is the people at MIPS. The superintendent's vision, Drew Holbert, and what he has brought in hiring staff and his vision, and that trickling down to the people that are hired. There's a different vibe here with the people. And so I'm really excited about that, because of that vibe has everything to do with the heart and the love behind the people, the people who make up MIPS, looking at these families saying, what can we do to give them an awesome education? And they're genuine about it. And they're in it from the heart and not for a paycheck. Yeah. And that's huge.
We're not here to crank out A's.
Nope.
We're here to help.
To help. Right. Yeah. Right. So I'm excited about that, because that then translates into where a philosophy and a leadership then play out every day. And that is, we have to help the family. and we help the kids. So we're assisting parents in their education and coming alongside them to say, we want to give you this experience. Now, we have limitations. We can't customize for everybody, meaning all the time, everything. But there's a lot of customizations that we can do. So part of it is, I'm excited about finding out where the staff is. And I'm along the way of that. And it seems like they're all kind of have that same mindset about let's work for the families. Oh, they need this. Let's make it happen. Right. But it's also, making sure not only the staff is there, but what can we do with the tools that we have to offer that? So like we have synchronous and asynchronous learning. Some kids can handle asynchronous, some can't. So how do we get better at managing that with them? Well, first, I want to make sure we're where we are, but then can we level up? Can we upgrade? And that's another thing that I'm bringing to the staff is where we are is where we are. Don't worry about whether it's necessarily good or bad, but always think about continuous improvement and leveling up and upgrading. So if you think down those terms, it's okay to try stuff and let's take risks and let's meet the family's needs and let's try this. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. We learn from it. Let's level it up next time and figure that out.
And that's something that's come up a lot of, even our superintendent, Drew Hulbert, had said that, there are certain periods of the year, of time, of the school year where he says, blink and you'll miss it, right? That we are continuously adapting. But what I've seen and what I'm hearing you say is we continuously try to do things that make it better. And if it doesn't, we keep what worked and move on. And if it does, we keep that and then move on to the next improvement, I guess. Is that close to what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think along with that is paying attention to those things that are working well so that people can get into a flow. Because when you're in your flow, things are going well, right? So then when a bump comes in or an obstacle or something, you're good in these other areas and you can give attention to that because you've worked out all these other areas. And MIPS being so new, 5 years into it, there's some of those areas even this year we're discovering and say, hey, we need to pay attention to that. So it is set, it works. And we'll keep an eye on it. We'll look for continuous improvement, but it allows us to operate at a high efficiency rate because we need to be spending our time on families and kids and not all this extraneous stuff to make it happen, right? And I think that's the fine tuning happening now, which is exciting.
And the opportunity is there.
Yeah, it's there. Definitely. I think one thing that comes to mind is, there's this idea that, virtual learning, parents are just taking their kids and throwing them in front of a computer and you just sit there. I'm excited to get the message out as MIPS has already started to do that. It's not about throwing a kid in front of a computer for an education. That's why we're assisting families. And so one of the things I'm excited about is moving forward and us taking to the next level with what's already been done is onboarding of students and families with the idea of here are the expectations when we talk about doing online learning. So like K-5, for example, I have a vision and have talked with some of the other staff about what might we do to onboard those parents to understand specifically K-3. But I like the idea of K-5, but if we can start with K-2, K-3, we have to make sure our parents know that if you come to MIPS, the expectation is there will be an adult that the family chooses to work with your child 2 or 3 hours a day. You have to. If you can't commit that as mom or dad, it can be grandpa or grandma, could be an older sibling. It could be someone from your church, someone from a group that you have, friends, whatever it is. But just understand your son or daughter is going to need an adult that guides and directs. They're not the teacher, but they guide and direct and provide that support that a young child needs to navigate being in the classes and making that work. Now, there's kindergartners everywhere that are navigating platforms just fine. So they can do it, but I'm excited about really helping parents get the vision of like, okay, so now I see what that means when we have to do school. And school doesn't have to be starting at 9 o'clock and go to 12 o'clock. That's the beauty of what we have to offer. As long as they have that time, you might do an hour in the morning because it works for you and your family. And then you pick up an hour in the afternoon and an hour because your child may need that. It might be your child needs to do their school all 3 hours in a row. Maybe. That's the beauty of the school that we have is that flexibility. And I know any virtual program has that, but what's different about ours is the support and that each student has a mentor and a teacher for access. And in addition to that, we have these labs across the state where they can do some in-person things, which is kind of a hybrid approach, so they can build that community with them. So
that's something that, we'll always be trying to work against, is this idea that you go to virtual school so you don't have to ride the bus, you don't have to sit in a desk, you can just do it whenever you want. And, flexibility is a positive, but we're not here to increase pajama stock, right? We're here to increase the amount of families that find something that works and helps their student be successful, especially if they're not getting it elsewhere, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And that makes me think of another exciting thing, is that we're really looking at making genuine some competency. Some people say soft skills, but those things that maybe not be as overt in other schools about what makes a person successful in life. And when we say successful, that is someone who leaves their education experience and they're able to move on in an area and become a productive citizen of our society. They're employed in some fashion, or they might become part of a family and they have kids, or they may go into the military. They may take on a vocational, but whatever they do, they're equipped with a foundational set of skills. And this is not new. This is not new at all, because that's what education has been for a long time, is that idea of creating, productive citizens, right? Responsible citizens. So that's not new. But what we're doing is, I think, digging in deeper, and I'm excited about making that more obvious in those competencies, like collaboration. Well, how do we make that real in an online classroom so that the student leaves our program and they really realize, I know how to collaborate. I know how to do that.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, that whole time you're talking, I'm picking out all right, here's an episode that I can grab them for. Here's an episode that I can grab them for, because that's really touching all aspects of education. And I know that you're passionate enough about it where we could do, our episodes for every single thing that you said there. And I love that. But for the sake of time, for the sake of, hearing those important vision points, we'll do this then. Every episode of the podcast, we end with what we call a win. We do this in our staff meetings. We do it in the podcast too, where we want to hear a positive story, a win. And this could be, you had a call with a parent who was really frustrated and you figured out something that works for the family and you're proud of it. Or you earned a new friendship or relationship with a staff member that you met and you're really excited for that. Or it could even be, I got a new desk and I love it and I'm more excited to go to my job. Whatever it is, what is a win that you might have had from these last couple weeks?
Yeah, I think I may have already alluded to it.
Okay.
And it's kind of the big one that come to MIPS, and that's the people. The win, I think, is having the blessing of becoming part of a group of individuals that are individuals in and of themselves, but they're like-minded in the heart and how they want to service families.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a huge win, because then there's a lot of grace among the people. There's a lot of understanding. There's a withholdment of judgment. If something goes wrong, it's like, well, let's figure that out. Instead of accusatory, let's blame that person. It's not my responsibility. It's none of that. It's the win is just the people and them having a heart and putting other people first and wanting to have loving, collaborative relationships. And it's so obvious here, which is great. And I think that just is going to pour into our families and our students. So that's my big win. That's what's a great thing about MIPS.
I love that. We're going to have to send out an all staff email that just says Roy's podcast win was you, and then don't do anything else. Just assume that everyone got it, right?
Yeah.
But I love that. Well, Roy, I know that you're busy, so thank you so much for taking the time to do this, for pouring your heart out so we can see what you're excited about. But thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I appreciate you having me.
Reimagining Education is brought to you by Michigan International Prep School. If you'd like to learn more about us and what we do, head to our website at miprepschool.org. That's miprepschool.org. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. We will talk to you soon.